I'm not one to be bought by things anyway. Hello, welcome to Sound and Fury Book Reviews. As usual, I'm Tina. You may notice that I am slightly less disheveled today. That's because I have a meeting, just in case you were wondering. So that's why I'm wearing a nice shirt, and I did my hair and actually put on makeup. So it's not for you. I'm sorry. But I did read 3 books in December. Only 3. That makes me sad. You'd think I'd have more time to read, in the last 2 weeks of the year. But because my husband was off work, we spent my usual reading time, which is when he goes to bed, playing video games. He's really into Cyberpunk, which, yes, has some glitches, At least once a session, he'd be like, ah, shit. And I'd look over and he'd get that blue screen of death and I'd be like, sorry, bud. I've gotten back into Fallout 76. I didn't enjoy it the first time around because I clocked maybe like 20 hours, but there was no NPCs, and as much as I actually am quite the misanthrope and don't really care about people, the game felt very empty without it. It felt like a very long session of the Long Divide, I think that's what's called, the New Vegas expansion. Anyway, I kind of got bored of it, but this time I'm actually pretty into it. What did I read in December? Which I should have been reading, but I was playing video games instead. I read, and I'm going to pronounce so many things about this wrong, was The Agonising Death of Waltham Pinchiksnits. I really hope that's how you say it, by Aksel, Erzinclioglu. I honestly, I'm so sorry. I can't pronounce your name. I'm so sorry. I feel really bad. So this was a mystery with sci-fi elements. The author is a super swell dude. He hosts a podcast for indie authors called So Long and Thanks for All the Books, and he was kind enough to do an interview with me. I've included a link in my description. But as a disclaimer, he did not in any way ask me to read his book. He didn't even mention he had a book when we did our interview. So his providing me an interview has nothing to do with the rating that I gave, I promise. So this is a weird-ass book that I really enjoyed. I mean, it's not too weird, it's not too hard to follow, but it's definitely a bit zany, and I think people that are expecting a kind of more typical kind of mystery are going to be like, what the heck is this? I found it fresh and unique. The plot is kind of hard to describe, but it's set in a small town in northern BC called British Columbia in Canada, called Faith, where all this weird stuff is kind of going on. There's this boy trapped in a dream. There's 2 hitmen that keep making mistake after mistake. There's a detective who's trying to find a cold case from like 20 years ago. A man who kind of helps fate along, fate as in like actual fate, destiny, and there's also an alien. So it starts off kind of as seemingly unrelated stories that share some minor details, but then you start to realize that they're all kind of connected, kind of like Pulp Fiction or like Run Lola Run, like those movies from the 90s. That was a big thing in the 90s to make movies like that. Anyway, the best part of the novel is this kind of setup of twists that kind of compile on one another. The structure is disjointed, but it's in a fun way, kind of like you're putting pieces of a puzzle together. And if you really like puzzles, like I really love puzzles, you'll probably really enjoy this book. At times I felt like I was maybe like half a step ahead of the characters. So when things panned out, I felt like I had figured something out. But then when they took a twist, I was pleasantly surprised. So there's nothing worse, I find, than a mystery book where you figure it out too early. That is the worst. It's so boring, man. I'd rather be like have a completely bizarre, weird twist happen at the end of a mystery book than know, too far in advance what the ending is. So this one is great. It does neither of those things. It's perfectly in the middle. The novel moves at a quick pace that feels very lively, and there are a lot of funny moments here and there, as well as some surprisingly visceral violence that I thought kind of suited the situations. In truth, the novel really reminded me of the show Dirk Gently. Yes, I know there's a book by Douglas Adams. I have not read the novels, but I have read all of the Hitchhiker's Guide, so okay, give me a break, okay? Anyway, I adored the show. I adored it, and I was so sad when I realized there wasn't only going to be like 2 seasons. If you haven't watched that show, I highly recommend it. I also highly recommend you read this book. We don't get a lot of time with the characters in the novel because there's so many of them, so they're all kind of surface level, but I think this suited the story. I think too much focus on their past or motivations would have made this tone far too dark. It would have lost a lot of its kind of fun aspects. My favorite character was Nick. I thought she was great. The police chief, though, he didn't really hit the mark for me. He was a little bit cliche. I think the cliched nature of him was meant to be like a joke. Like the fact that he was a cliche was a joke, but it just didn't really work with me. I mean, other than that, there were a few small things here and there that kept it from being a complete 5 stars to me, so I'm giving it a 4.5 out of 5 stars. But I always lean in favor of the author on Goodreads and Amazon, so you'll notice if you notice my reviews on there that I gave it a 5. But yeah, for me it was like a 4.5. Anyway, though, I mean, that's not a bad score at all. This is a zany, fun, exciting puzzle novel. It keeps you guessing. It's very easy to read. I very much enjoyed it. This, though, has nothing to do with my rating or review, but please don't try to smoke weed like an old tobacco pipe. You don't tamp it down. You light it as you inhale and you repeat. You don't light it once and puff away like a British lord. That's not how you smoke weed from a pipe. Just putting that out there. Anyone who wants to ask me any questions about weed for their books, let me know. I can answer these questions for some reason. The next book that I read was Piranesi by Susanna Clarke. This was a big one at the end of last year. It's a sci-fi fantasy, I guess. I mean, it's an engrossing and hypnotic story that keeps you guessing. It's like a lyrical mystery that's going to please people that enjoy the mythology of labyrinths and themes of isolation. So that was totally up my alley. Those are like two of the things I love the most. I can't really say too much without giving it away. This is one of those books where you want to go into it knowing absolutely freaking nothing. So even a description of the setting, I think, would spoil it. Like, I literally into this book, I watched Max Reads, I've tagged him, his really good review of it. I didn't watch his whole review because I didn't want to get spoilers, but I really liked what he said about it. And I must say that thank you for that review because it did push me into reading it and I really enjoyed it. So I'm going to break this review into 3 parts. I'm going to do a very, very vague review for people like me who don't want to know anything about the story but are intrigued by the concept. I'm going to do a non-spoiler review that's more, a little deeper, goes into a couple plots but no spoilers. And then I'm going to do a spoiler area because I need to defend my rating of it. I'm going to tell you first, I usually do it at the end, but I'm going to say I give this book a 4 out of 5, not a 5 out of 5. So here's my very vague review. This novel is a mysterious and deeply enthralling story with a likable, albeit unreliable narrator. The prose is beautiful, while at the same time clear and concise. I was never bored or confused while reading. The novel is very mimetic in that we're on the same journey that Piranesi is on, trying to figure out what all of it means. That's it. That's all I'm going to say. So jump to this time if you want to skip my other 2 reviews. So my bit more of a detailed review. So people who enjoy exposition are not going to like this book very much. Piranesi, he infodumps a little bit at the start to kind of get us going, but it's artfully done in that it raises more questions than answers, though it does situate us in the story. You spend most of the novel trying to decipher whether everything mentioned is some sort of clue as to what's going on or whether it's like symbolic of something else. The temple and the labyrinth where Piranesi lives made sense. I believed that he could survive there. I loved the concept of the flooding and how it impacted the structure over time. I loved the small details like the mysterious skeletons and the albatross. Like all these little things were just made it such a fun and immersive story. I'm not super fond of epistolary novels. I can't pronounce it. Especially journals. So, books that are like made to be journals or letters, things like that. You really have to suspend your disbelief when it comes to what details people would include if a journal were real. Like this novel makes it an easy task because you often forget that it's supposed to be like a journal, though it being a journal is part of the plot. So I actually was fine with it this time. I mean, there's ones that do it well, like The Woman in White is a really great one like this, by Wilkie Collins. There's some other, there's tons that do this. Some fail, some succeed. This one succeeds, I thought. There's a mystery to be had, though, but I found it paled in comparison to the temple itself. The novel's real strength, in my mind, is the descriptions and its ability to convey tone. I wish it were a lot longer and a lot more complex thematically. As someone who reads a lot of sci-fi and experimental literature, I didn't find it all that weird at all, or demanding intellectually, completely honest. I sound like pretentious dick, but I did not find it that... I didn't find like I had to struggle to understand it, which is actually something I enjoy doing. So that's kind of my review without giving too much away. now I'm going to go into spoilers, so jump to, again, this time, if you want to skip the spoilers if you intend on reading this, which I think you should. It's a good book. So, as I kind of hinted before, unfortunately this book is almost too literal for me. I definitely enjoyed it, and I think it's quite beautiful in its prose and its concept, and I would definitely buy it used somewhere if I came across it in a store. But I was kind of hoping for a lot more, you know. There's no real twist. It's evident from the get-go that Ketterle was the bad guy. True, I thought Ketterle was like camping out in the realm rather than merely visiting once in a while. I kind of assumed it was a sort of like liminal space between worlds or like a dead dimension, that kind of thing. I just figured that Ketterle was living there and like traveling back to get supplies. I mean, I was slightly wrong, but I was correct enough. I really enjoyed the journey of reading it, for sure. But the ending for me was rather kind of like, oh, with no real kind of like punch to it. In the end, I was like, all right. It's kind of what I thought. I kind of assumed that, you know, Piranesi was like a prisoner there and that kind of thing. Anyway, I had so many questions. You know, why does the labyrinth, or perhaps the realm itself, cause amnesia? Who made the temple? Where did they go? If it's people from Earth, perhaps the ancient Greeks or Romans, given it's a temple, how did they build it? You know, was it, I'm assuming it was, you know, Roman, and it had the columns and things like that, but, I mean, it could have been another classical peoples, I suppose. How did they build it? How did they get the materials there? You know, is the water like a water world zone? Is it our world, but it's now water world, like a different dimension? Are the birds natural to that kind of plane of existence, or are they from Earth somehow? You know, is it water world? I'm going to go back to Waterworld. Is Piranesi living in a temple that survived? Is it on a hill? You know, I guess these are all like kind of like sci-fi reader questions, and then I'm like, I want answers to these questions. And I absolutely adore labyrinths, and I love Greek mythology. So I was a little let down that there weren't some more symbolism behind the statues. I mean, there were references to the Minotaur and a few others, you know, to reinforce the maze concept. I also believe that the whole thing was alluding to Plato's The Cave, you know, where Piranesi is clearly the prisoner that comes to understand what he believes is reality is not reality at all. Because that whole story is that you've got people... God, I'm gonna explain this terribly. I'm not a philosophy professor. You have people in this cave, and all they've ever known is the walls of the cave. So if you try to convince them, though, without them actually seeing it, that there's other realities, they're not going to believe you. But then I think in the story, someone turns around and they end up believing, realizing that the reality is a sham or not what they think. And so Piranesi is that person. Like, think of it like the Matrix, like, you know, Neo's like, oh my god, I'm not in real life. And then like the Truman Show, that's a great example too. I mean, and Fahrenheit 451 does it as well, but like in a more political sense. I just kind of am like, okay, like, I've seen this clearly before. So I would have enjoyed it a lot more if the entire thing was concocted within Piranesi's head as a way to deal with being kidnapped by Ketterle for years, perhaps. Instead, he's like literally in another plane of existence but he isn't interested in determining the origin of it. You know, he doesn't care what's going on. I'm assuming that this knowledge that Ketterle was seeking was what I wanted to know. You know, why is this temple here? How does it exist? You know, what's going on here? But I guess Piranesi just doesn't care, and I guess I didn't understand why. So that's the end of the spoilers. In truth, though, despite these like kind of small and minor issues, really, they're more like me being like, I want more, blah, blah, blah. I found the novel very deeply enjoyable. It was very easy to read. It was quite fun. I just found it a little surface level. I'm not saying it's not intelligent in terms of its themes or even execution. Perhaps it would actually do more for me in a second read, but it just didn't hit me like hard enough to love it. Still, highly recommended for people who want something a little different, and here is a quote that I liked. I felt and smelt the air those wings brought with them, the sharp, salt, wild tang of faraway tides and winds that had roamed vast distances through halls I would never see. I thought that was cool. Okay, and the last book that I read, I actually read it over the course of a couple months, and it was Within a Budding Grove in Search of Lost Time, Part 2. If you actually want to read or hear me talk about this in depth, because I know everyone does, I'm going to plug my Proust Reflections playlist again. I do in-depth reviews of every 100 pages because I am a dork. Anyway, I can't really review this like a regular novel. What Proust is doing is providing like less of a story and then embarking on this exploration into the function of memory and how reflection can provide as much clarity as it muddles things even further. It's basically just a story about thinking back on your life and how your perceptions of things are different now than they were back then. And especially when you're a young teenager. You know, there's a lot of themes in this novel, and a lot of like situations. I'm going to list off a few of them. So he talks about society, adolescence, attraction, getting drunk, the sea, art, snobbery, intellectualism, class, playing hard to get, having a crush on your friend's mom, loneliness, youthful beauty, pastoral life, and of course he talks about love. These themes and images kind of interweave throughout the novel with deftness and nuance. You know, when Marcel approaches a topic again, as he doesn't just approach these in one chunk, he comes back to things, he layers things. It doesn't feel like he's rambling, even though he probably is rambling. Proust is a master of writing, and I think people that dismiss him without giving it a fair chance really need to kind of like, just take the dive in and see. You don't have to like it. I understand why people wouldn't, but I'm a Proust fan, I guess. I'm giving it 5 out of 5, but really, what else am I gonna give it? Like, come on. I had a whole bunch of favorite quotes that I'll share with you. Prepare for my lovely reading again. It was always thus, impelled by a state of mind which is destined not to last, that we make our irrevocable decisions. I can't pronounce irrevocable properly, apparently. She was thus undergoing the attraction, unconsciously and at a distance, as the sea is swayed by the moon, though without being drawn perceptibly closer to it. For regret, like desire, seeks not to analyze but to gratify itself. This is why the better part of our memories exists outside us, in a bladder of rain, in the smell of an unaired room, or of the first crackling firebrush fire in a cold grate. Wherever, in short, we happen upon what our mind, having no use for it, had rejected, the last treasure that the past has in store, the richest that which, when all our flow of tears seems to have dried at the source, can make us weep again. I'm always weeping when I, hear crackling fireplaces. I'm just crying all the time. Just because I like Proust doesn't mean I think that the narrative of the book isn't a complete Dorcas, because he is a weird little creep. Anyway, she went past, and I was left in my isolation like a shipwrecked mariner who has seen a vessel apparently approaching, which has then vanished under the horizon. You're dead. Her friend had extraordinarily bright eyes, like a glimpse through an open door in a dark house, of a room into which the sun is shining with a greenish reflection from the glittering sea. But yeah, that's it for December. I've already read one book in 2021. It's about Waterworld yet again. So I'm hoping to have at least 4 this month to talk about, but we'll see. We'll see.